Good evening, everyone. Once again, I'm Tito Leota, an orthopedic surgeon with Valley Ortho at Valley View Hospital. It's my pleasure to introduce a follow-on to my lecture a few weeks ago about generalized shoulder pain and problems. One of the things that we were a little skimpy on is some of the exercises and how to improve your shoulder. So tonight, one of our leading physical therapists, Adam Klebert, and one of our brand new athletic trainers, Megan, are going to go over exercise prescription and a lot of suggestions as how to begin your road to shoulder health. So without further ado, here's Adam Klebert and Megan.
Thank you. Thanks, Tito. We're on?
I think we're on.
Okay. All right. So again, I'm Adam, and this is Megan.
I'm Megan.
In case you're confused. So we're going to start today talking about exploring healthy concepts for maintaining shoulder health, or if you're recovering from an injury, kind of best practices to go about that. So I'm going to get the slide going. So the reason a lot of people want to talk about the shoulder is it's a common source of pain, and are we on?
I think so.
Okay, I'm gonna because we cannot have the picture here.
We don't see ourselves.
Right. I'm gonna check on one thing. What's this?
It's okay. It's fine.
We're not. I can't see us.
You are. I can see you.
Okay, cool. All right, so confirm. Sorry, just didn't want to have another run of the knee lab issues.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the shoulder moves a whole lot. It's the most mobile region in the body. About 20 muscles. We could argue control that shoulder over 3 main joints. Those joints being the SC joint that attaches your collarbone to your sternum, your AC joint, which contacts your collarbone to your shoulder blade, and then the glenohumeral joint, which is that ball and socket. So we're going to consider that the true shoulder joint when we're talking about it. So a lot of the conversation today is going to talk about the glenohumeral joint. Okay, the scapulothoracic joint isn't necessarily a true joint. It's kind of how your shoulder blade moves on your rib cage behind you, but it's very important to healthy shoulder mobility. So in terms of normal shoulder mobility, these slides kind of represent how far we're supposed to move. Megan has a great moving shoulder. Okay, so when we're looking at, let's say, that second picture coming straight up in front, if Megan looks right at the camera, comes right up in front, what we see is a very easy vertical arm position. We see a little window here that shows good gliding of that joint, and we can see that joint is staying very centered at the shoulder. Okay, same thing to the side. It looks very similar. That ball kind of stays right where we want it to in the shoulder joint, and we have that nice window here. When things aren't moving quite as well, I will show you because my shoulder is not very good. When we come up here, things start to kind of bind and jam a little bit, and then we kind of shrug up into here, showing a little bit of tightness, and that ball isn't gliding quite as well as a optimal moving shoulder might. Okay, so that's kind of up and down. We also rotate here, so we have some spin motion. Right, so there's a good mobility there, and then into the stomach. Right, again, we're not seeing a lot of shoulder blade rolling back and forth. It's staying very localized to that spot. You can also look at motion up at this level, and again, very easy. We can see a very clean spinning joint there. Okay, so Megan has a great moving shoulder. If only we all move that well. But we're going to talk about what to do if you don't move as well as she does as well. Okay. The big long-term goal for a shoulder is to keep that glenohumeral joint centered. Okay. And as I'm going through all this stuff, I'm trying not to get too technical. Please reach out in the Q&A if you have any questions. We'll try to. It'll interrupt us a little bit, which is good, so that we can slow it down for everybody if something's not making sense. So please use that Q&A as we're going through this whenever you need to, especially when we get into exercise. Okay, so again, back to the glenohumeral joint. Okay, that's that GHJ acronym. That is our ball and socket. That is the analogy of a golf ball and a golf tee. The golf tee being the scapula, the shoulder blade, and then the ball being the humeral head. Okay, so we want to keep those things nice and centered in the joint. And the AC joint and SC joint and how the shoulder blade moves, those move in order to keep that ball centered on that tee. In that second picture, it's a side view, so kind of looking right from here. Okay, I'm going to maybe get my nerdy laser pointer out here. So this is looking at the side view from here. This is the golf tee. Around it we have the rotator cuff, which is your dynamic control for the muscles to keep it there. And then inside of that, closer to the joint, is the joint capsule, and that's more of connective tissue, more ligamentous-like, that doesn't contract but hopes to stabilize that ball in that joint. And then in this third picture, this is looking at the scapulothoracic joint. So this is the shoulder blade moving on the back, and the shoulder blade rotates up and down, in and out, and again, that's all geared to keep that ball on that tee. Okay, so as we're kind of looking at, everybody could probably balance an egg on a spoon, right? That's kind of we could use that analogy instead of a golf ball, golf tee. You could stand there and it could be totally fine. So that's kind of like just your general posture. Then how many of us could kind of walk slowly? Probably a good amount of us. How many of us could run and keep it on there? And how many of us could run during an earthquake or run through water? So the higher the demand is, the more likely it is we're going to need some strength to hold that egg on that spoon. Okay, so that's our dynamic control, and we'll talk about how we can maybe get everybody a little closer to that. Okay. So here are some other images talking about that glenohumeral joint position. So here we have the head of the humerus centered on the golf tee, on just a static, just standing still x-ray. This slide next to it talks about a normal muscle force that helps keep that joint centered. So the ball rolls up as we come up, but it also slides down so that we keep that position. So part of that slide is encouraged by the rotator cuff. So we want a nice, strong, coordinated rotator cuff to keep that centered. When this gets imbalanced, this is just an x-ray of somebody likely without any shoulder rotator cuff here. So we have an elevated humeral head, so nothing is pulling it down into the joint. So that's not going to move very well, and it's going to bind and pinch and lead to that shrug where we don't have that window to operate. This picture over here in the good side, we can take an x-ray and it can look like this when somebody's not moving, but then it can look like this when people start to move if they don't have good rotator cuff control. Okay, so it's about getting both of those things together. So what do we do? This is our obligatory funny slide because they're shrugging. Okay, next. Healthy shoulder principle, number one, we want to keep or establish, if we don't have it, the motion to help center that joint. So that's motion across both the SC, the AC, and the shoulder blade and the glenohumeral joint all need to work together to keep that ball centered. Okay, so we need to have passive joint motion, which is if somebody's stretching you or if you're hanging on something, does your shoulder move enough to keep it centered? Okay, so let's go into some common things that we see that limit that for the average person who might be having some shoulder issues with training or daily activities. One of the more common ones, we have some posterior rotator cuff tension or posterior capsule tension, and this is due to the infraspinatus, which is your big external rotator. This is on, we can turn you around. This is on the back side of the shoulder blade right here. So here's the shoulder blade sitting right in the middle there. Okay, so this is responsible for doing that external rotation motion. It can also limit internal rotation, especially when we get up into overhead. It starts to get a little bit tighter, and if it doesn't have the mobility, it will maybe not make you look like this guy, but you lose the ability to glide down appropriately. We don't have the right rotation, and it won't allow the right motion to occur at that glenohumeral joint to keep it centered. Okay? So if you have a tight backside of the cuff and that infraspinatus, we have a really good go-to stretch that Tito mentioned during his talk to address that issue. Okay? So if we go, this is the sleeper stretch. Okay? So I'm going to have Megan lay down on her right side. So this is going to stretch her right arm. Okay? And I'm going to make us a little bit bigger, hopefully. Perfect. And keep us plugged into the wall. All the things that we need to do. Okay, so from here, what we do is we don't want to lay directly on the shoulder. A lot of times that's bothersome anyway. So we want to kind of kick the shoulder out. So you're almost reaching there. You're slightly rolled onto it. That'll hold the shoulder blades still. Okay, the elbow is out about shoulder level. It can be from shoulder level all the way down to kind of mid-range here. We'll start here, and then she'll take her left hand, place it on the wrist, and you rotate down, keeping this elbow at 90 degrees. Okay? It doesn't do much stretch at the shoulder if we just do something like this, where the elbow straightens. Okay? So we really want to encourage that spin at the humerus, and that's going to stretch back here. So as she goes down, let's say that's a stretch, and a good stretch that we would want is something that takes place on the back side of the shoulder, or kind of down that outside part of the arm. What we don't want to see is any pinching or pain on the front or the top of the shoulder joint. Okay, that might mean either the stretch is too much, the joint position is already too far forward, that we're already too far out of that centered position. Okay, ways to change that, so you don't need to immediately throw out the exercise. What we can do to change it, let's say she's pinching there, we can either take the elbow down a little bit, closer to her feet, and then reattempt, okay, and maybe that feels better, maybe it doesn't. We can come back up, so if that doesn't work, another thing we can do is I can have her either roll on top of the shoulder a little bit more, and then come down into it, or roll off and come into it as well. It's really important to find that key stretch on the back side of the joint or down the outside of the arm and not into the front. Okay, you might irritate things more than you want, so we'll just avoid that. Yeah? Okay. I'm going to switch the screen back, but please reach out with any clarifying questions as we go. Okay.
Adam, we did have one question come
Okay.
in.
Yeah.
Wondering what you can do for side sleeping pain and positioning your shoulder.
If both shoulders don't hurt, sleep on the other side. But if you just absolutely have to sleep on that side, the thing is probably not to lie directly onto it. Have it kicked out so that it's a little bit more open. Yeah, the best is to avoid it if you can and change sleeping postures. But you change pillow size sometimes helps. You can elevate the head of the bed as well. That'll take some strain off if you're going to lay on your side. I don't know, do you have any other ones that you go to?
If you've got another pillow, you can kind of put it behind so that's something you can lay on when you're laying on that side. Kind of roll onto that, relieve some of the pressure that you're putting on the shoulder joint.
Perfect, yeah. Yeah, so a couple more pillows.
Yes.
Cool.
Okay.
That's good. Yep.
Good.
I'm just going to stay and try to fix the camera if it
Oh,
does that to you again, but go ahead.
oh, all right. Okay, we'll see. What do you think?
Perfect.
All right, so maybe I was in screen the whole time. I don't know. But
I think so.
okay, excellent. So on this slide, this kind of goes over everything we talked about and ways to address things like that. So I'll move on from this one. That was that posterior cuff infraspinatus stretch. Another common one that we see, and I am very guilty of this one, is teres major tension. Okay, so on the model here, this one goes from a little bit lower on the shoulder blade and attaches a little bit lower on the arm. This is not a rotator cuff muscle, but it's really involved in how much that joint can stay centered when we're moving. The picture over here kind of shows some tension on the right side, a little bit better mobility on the left. But what happens is, the glenohumeral joint, the ball in the socket, is responsible for moving 120 degrees. Megan, when she goes up overhead, she goes up, that's 180 degrees, that's straight up and down, okay? So 2/3 of that comes from the ball in the socket. The other third comes from the shoulder blade rotating up to keep that T holding the golf ball, okay? So we need both of those working in coordination to have that happen. What happens when this muscle is tight is you can't get 120 degrees at that ball and socket because you've kind of glued the humerus to the shoulder blade. So now I'm only getting 90 degrees here, and I'm getting 60 degrees here, and then that's when I end up, you move kind of more like me, and you get this little shrug here because we have some tension here. So I need a little bit of stretching, so Megan's going to walk me through the next stretch. Okay?
All right, so this next stretch that we're going to do is called the prayer stretch. So I'm going to scoot us back a little bit. All right. So on a chair into a table, preferably a rolly chair so you can move, what you're going to do is you're going to set your elbows onto that table about shoulder width apart. So we're using a glove box to kind of simulate that. You can use something that's about that size or just kind of measure from shoulder width apart. What you're going to do is you're going to keep your fingers facing up towards that ceiling as you push your hips back so it'll stretch out at that shoulder joint. What you'll find is that if one side is a little bit tighter than the other, sometimes it'll start to kind of push away to the other side. Use your hands to kind of stabilize right in that middle. That's why holding something can kind of be helpful. You should feel it stretching more in that back side of the shoulder rather than up in front or anything like that.
Want to stay here for the next bit if you want to continue the whole thing?
Yeah, perfect. We'll just keep stretching.
Okay. Very good, thank you.
Of course.
All right. Get this back. Any questions about that stretch? We'll wait just a half second here.
Just a hair.
Cool. Nope, I think we're good. Okay. Yeah, all right. Okay. So coming through. So again, this slide goes over kind of the basics. I think the slide will be available if you're on the Zoom for later use. So mobility is our first principle because mobility is essential. If we don't move well enough, there's no way we can center that joint anyway, regardless of how strong you are, and there might be a range or an activity that the shoulder doesn't like. So mobility is really our first step that we have to get. The bummer is if you have been tight for so long, we get other joint changes. That capsule can get a little bit stiff, and even if you're doing the right muscle stretching, you won't be able to necessarily stretch that joint the way we want. So that's why no matter what you do in the sleeper stretch or this stretch, if you're getting pinching on top, it's not your fault. You might not be doing it wrong, but your joint might be a little bit too stiff to benefit from those stretches right now. So getting some joint work from a provider, if you know some good physical therapists or occupational therapists, that would be something to look into because you're only going to be able to do so much on your own. I know physical therapists see other physical therapists for their shoulder issues. We can't always work on it ourselves, and sometimes you just need help to get over that hump. Okay. And then any questions about general mobility, be happy to take. Then we'll move.
Adam, I had one more question, if you don't mind me interrupting.
Yeah.
Wondering kind of how that stretch should feel, how hard that should feel, and how long they should hold it, and how many reps a day, if you had a guide for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
That's a good question. Yeah, we don't have any reps or duration on here. Stretching, we want to stay in a, I usually instruct, and you can take it a different way if you want, but I usually instruct in like a moderately strong kind of stretching sensation. For that last one, we do, like Megan was saying, want that stretch on this underside here. That's the muscle we're going after, and not a sharp pinching pain on top. If you have to like bite down on something to do a stretch, that stretch is too much, and I usually back them out of that. Holding for around 30 seconds at least is a good rule of thumb, and then coming in and out of it for like 4 repetitions. So you're getting 2 minutes of stretching hopefully going a little further each time in something that's not painful. I don't know, do you have any other
Yeah.
guides?
No. Sounds perfect.
Okay, and I'd say the same thing for the sleeper stretch as well. And you're just looking, if your mobility improves, you might get to that joint pinch anyway. Okay, so it doesn't mean do it more. It means that maybe you're stretched out enough and you can stop doing that stretch, because hopefully you get motion, and then you don't need to do the stretching quite as often. So you might stretch that muscle out. Like for me, I've been tight for a while. I don't think I have good joint mobility. I should be better. No, shame on me. But if I stretch out my teres a whole lot, I might get to the point where my joint starts to pinch because my capsule's too tight. Okay, I could do all the teres major stretch, but it could put me in a bad spot in time, and then I'd need some joint work. Luckily, this is where I do things, and my kid's not old enough to throw a ball yet, so I don't have to do much overhead.
Yeah.
But when that happens, I might need some work.
These are some easy things you can also do, like when you get out of bed in the morning, because like the sleeper stretch, you're already laying down, so just do it before you get up out of bed or before you go to bed at night. When you sit down for a meal, if you do it at like that prayer stretch at the table, those are easy kind of reminders because you're already close to those positions. So that's a good way to remember when to do it throughout the day.
That's perfect. Office job with a roller chair,
Right?
You're set.
It's perfect.
Ready to go. All right, so that brings us to principle 2, and there are only 2 principles, so
Yeah.
we're going through this pretty good. So if we have the mobility that we want, okay, then we have to make sure that we have the stability and strength to get the movement to center at that joint. On this picture on the right, these angles of pull are talking about the 3 of the 4 rotator cuff muscles that have, when they work, they drive that head in a downward direction to keep that joint centered. Because if the head is a ball on a tee, if we let that ball just roll up, it's going to keep rolling up, and it's going to roll off the tee, and it's going to pinch in that joint. So those muscles have to control that roll by pulling that head back down and keeping it centered. So we need a certain amount of strength to do that and coordination to do that. So we're going to go over some basic rotator cuff health exercises and kind of show you. These are maybe ones you're familiar with, but these are the staples, I think, to a healthy shoulder. So they should stay in almost anybody's program who have shoulders. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to have Megan maybe lead us in this one.
Yeah. So 2 of the main things you're going to do is internal and external rotation. We are going to use a band and a door for internal and external rotation. So I'm going to rotate us a little bit. The first one it's going to show is internal, and then, yeah, we just have internal right there.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm rotating us towards the door.
Perfect. That fits the theme.
Right?
Yep.
Fits the theme. Alright, so what you're going to do is, to make it a little bit easier on yourself, rolling up a towel or something around that size and putting it in between your ribs and your elbow is going to help as a reminder to kind of keep your elbow in. You're going to stand with your hand towards the door and you're going to pull in, squeezing that towel towards you. Just as far as you can go. That resistance is going to pull, that's internal rotation. So the closer you are to the door and the more you hold, more tension you hold, the more resistance you're going to have. So if that's a little too much, you can always back up a little bit and give yourself less resistance if that's too much. So that'll help. Yep. So you can see that he's squeezing in, he's not losing that towel, and he's just doing that rotation.
And the arm the humerus has a pure spin to it as well. We're not getting any of the rolling or anything like that.
We're keeping shoulders back, we're setting down. Set yourself first before you do any type of motion. So shoulders back, set, and then go in.
Yeah.
That'll help to keep from any of that computer hunching.
Cool. I'll
Perfect.
show the other.
And then external rotation is the same. If you do it on the same side, just turn so you're facing the other direction, or do the other side. And you're going to do the same thing, towel underneath elbow and ribs, and you're going to pull out. Same reset before. Try and keep your elbow as close to being straight as you can. Try not to go down or up with that elbow. Perfect.
Cool. So in terms of rep sets, do you have a go-to?
Go-to for most people is usually 3 sets of 10, but depending on your strength starting, it may be easier to start with 3 sets of 5 until you get into it, something like that, or 2 sets of 10 until you can build up to 3.
Yeah. Monitoring for irritation. If this is a problem for you and you know you have shoulder issues or maybe a partial tear, which is common, especially as we age, you're going to want to just monitor how you're responding to it. And a slow progression, if it's new, is an important strategy.
Yeah. Start with less and you can always go to more.
If you get way too sore and then you stop exercising altogether,
that's not good either.
Really haven't done a... Okay. Okay, so those are our basic exercises down at our side.
Maybe not.
There we go. Okay, and there was a question I think that came in about thoracic spine mobility, which is a key point, especially as we're getting overhead. So we don't want to forget about general upper back mobility in and out. We need a certain amount, especially to get that shoulder blade and those muscles that control the shoulder blade into where we want that. So that scapular positioning is really enhancing your scapulothoracic joint mobility, which we need to accommodate for a centered shoulder. So that's a very good point. Any type of, mostly people are limited into extension with the thoracic spine and some rotation as well. We don't have these in our slides right now, but if that might be a direction we go in another talk. But thoracic extension, mobilization, self-mobilizations, and then rotations as well would round out a good scapulothoracic mobility program. So definitely important, but we just don't have a slide for that. So again, moving on with some initial rotator cuff exercises. This is getting us closer to shoulder height, which is when the rotator cuff is in most need to center that joint. Down here is a great place to layer some strength and some initial stuff, but we do want to elevate the rotational exercises up higher. Whether you can take the same exercise and rotate here, which we didn't discuss, but I like this one a lot for some early exercises, especially in the painful patient when you're already having some shoulder problems. Okay, so I'm going to turn here. We're going to have Megan grab a ball. Okay, so we're going to use that wall there. All right, let's use your left arm.
Okay.
Okay, so what we do is we're going to keep the elbow straight. It's going to be kind of around shoulder level. And then what she's going to do is she's just going to gently lean her body weight into it a little bit. It doesn't have to be like a push-up type pressure, but just a little bit. That actually helps to center the joint. And then what we're going to do is we're going to ask her to do small circles. Maybe, yeah, let's go clockwise first. So she's maintaining that pressure. We're getting some some controlled mobility and keeping that joint centered with the contact pressure. So it's a really good space to start. And then we'll go the other way. So we'll do, I say about 30 clockwise, 30 counterclockwise.
I'm sure your thing's a little bigger.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were small. Now we're big. So this gives a clearer picture. So she has a little bit of body weight lean on. The ball doesn't have to necessarily be this size. You could use a volleyball, a soccer ball. You can get away with a tennis ball. You can get away with a towel. The ball rolls a little easier, but just enough where you can lean body weight in. The goal is not to have any pain or pinching with this, but maybe a little bit of burning fatigue would be good. So we'll do it in a forward direction, and then I'll have her kind of turn towards us a little bit. It doesn't need to be pure to the side. We're going to also make sure that her shoulder blades are set down so that we don't have the hiking type position, so the shoulders we're not into exercise we're doing up here, and we're already not centered. So we want to center that joint and then exercise it in a center joint position, and we do the same thing. 30 clockwise, 30 counterclockwise, and then I'd probably repeat that for 2 minutes of exercise time in each direction. You can kind of use that burning fatigue as your guide, and that's kind of your goal for that. Okay, so these are ones that you can do with just about anything. Towel's fine, and yeah, it's a nice entry spot where people don't tend to get hurt, but they can get stronger and a lot more coordinated around that joint. Okay, so I'm just going to hold on any questions real quick before we click through. Cool? No? Great.
Cool.
So, and again, just like mobility wasn't easy, sometimes strengthening isn't as easy either, especially if you have a compromised shoulder or you know you have shoulder issues. You can bump into your limitations rather easily. That's why we start with low reps and kind of see how it goes. Ideally, in the physical therapy world, what we're looking to do is we're looking to dose you at the highest amount that you can maintain a good joint position, and then we monitor the tissue to make sure it's not getting further injured as it goes, okay? So that can take the eyes of a professional sometimes, whether that's a personal trainer, athletic trainer, a PT, or an occupational therapist. But if you just can't monitor and you keep bumping into this ceiling of discomfort and pain, you might need a couple other eyes on you to help out. And then we also have to entertain the fact that the shoulder is, you know, we move it with the nerves from our neck. All right, so there's oftentimes we see some type of neck issue that can limit shoulder progress, and that often takes another set of eyes, a professional eye, to take a look at it. So either coming in, you know, seeing somebody here at Valley Ortho, or going to your primary care, or any rehab professional. Like, you're gonna want to get things screened out. If you're just not making the right progress, don't beat your head against the wall here. You know, we have the right resources to help you out. Okay, so you can do this. On the positive note, you got it. All right, and these are some entry-level tools to get you to it. And if you can't do it, we're here to help. So here are some resources for you to check out or contact us, and let us know if you have any other questions that we can cover on future talks. So I'll wait for any other questions, and then I think Tito will come in. And
So there was a small question about, you know, why does my shoulder feel fine during the day and bother me at night when I sleep? And that's, I think, a very simple answer for a very difficult problem. And it's very common for the shoulder to hurt at night. So think about this bottle being you during the day, and it's half full. When it's up like this, is you standing upright, and the water is in the bottom half of the bottle. You lay down, the water is still in the bottom half of this bottle, but it goes from your feet to your arms. And so that fluid that was in the bottom part of you is now also up to your arms, and especially if you're laying on that shoulder, it will go to your shoulder. You've used it during that day, and it will effectively now be swollen. And that's why it can bug you at night. One of the simple solutions is to sleep a little bit inclined with either a wedge or one of those beds that lean up to kind of take that gravity and help you not be as swollen.
okay, we'll check for any other questions first.
Right. Cause and cure of shoulder impingement.
So a question with shoulder impingement. So if somebody was diagnosed with shoulder impingement, that really means that we're not keeping the glenohumeral joint centered. That head of the humerus is not centered on that golf tee with certain motions. So these are initial fixes for it to try to get the mobility that we need, so we get that, so we can center it, and then some initial control around it, so then when we do move, the rotator cuff is strong enough to keep it centered. So impingement is really, to me, a centering issue, and I hope these help. But again, there are situations where the joint is too stiff or the rotator cuff is too weak that it is very hard to make progress on your own, and that's the time, after you maybe try this approach, to have somebody take a look at it and give you some support. We'll check for any other questions, but these are great. No? Think we're good? Yeah? No? Maybe. Yeah.
All right.
Good. All set?
Great, yeah,
All right.
thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
So we will keep this open for just a few minutes. If anyone has any more questions, you can certainly send them into the Q&A. If there are any unanswered questions, we'll take a look at those and we'll send emails tomorrow answering your questions or give you a call. A couple reminders after this closes up. You'll have a survey, and we really encourage you to fill that out so you can give us some feedback on what you liked, what you didn't like, suggestions for us for topics for the future. We do have 2 more webinars coming up this year, one in November and one in December. Tomorrow you will get an email. In that email will be a link to the recording of this webinar, as well as links to register for future webinars. We will continue doing these events in 2020, and we'll have a schedule and sign up links coming up soon. So thank you everyone for joining, and have a great evening.